Welcome back to Global Supply Chain Week, our automotive day. I'm joined for this section by Craig Knight, who is the CEO of Hyzon Motors. Hyzon is a sort of a startup, but more of a spin out of a company called Horizon Fuel Cell Technologies out of Singapore. And so Hyzon itself is a relative newcomer, certainly relatively new to the US, but we are happy to be able to talk with Craig about the business of fuel cells and what we call the democratization because they are catching on now without doubt. We don't know that they're not 10 years away, but Craig would probably tell us they're not because he's been making, tens of thousands of them. But anyway, I want to welcome Craig. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, I think we probably, before we get into supply chain things, I think we've got to do a little bit of a level set for the audience in terms of just how Hyzon Motors fits from a spinoff, and then also, recently going through the special purpose acquisition company SPAC experience and that sort of thing. I think we need to kind of have an understanding of how the business is set up. Can you do that for us, Greg?
Sure, I can do that. I'll just give a little bit of historical context and then talk a little bit about our mission, if you like. So, uh, we set up Hyzon Motors as a new business as like a downstream application business, so technology carve out, if you like, from the parent company. And the parent company has spent almost 2 decades developing fuel cell technology and fuel cell applications. So, we have chosen to set up this new business in commercial mobility because the opportunity for the core fuel cell technology that I've been involved with for almost 20 years is really very significant. So we believe that we can have a very significant impact on these pretty challenging to abate sectors that contribute a lot of emissions, and that's heavy trucking, very busy city buses, very high utilization, delivery trucks, concrete trucks, refuse collection vehicles, that sort of thing. So we're really going after some of these vehicle scenarios that are very difficult to take off diesel, frankly, because they're frequently two or more driver shifts in a day. And it's just very difficult to find an alternative to be able to make these vehicles zero emission. But that's exactly what we're doing with Hyzon Motors. So we kind of encapsulate that objective as accelerating the energy transition in commercial mobility.
So your ambitions are truly global. I mean, you come out of Asia for, as you said, you were one of the co-founders of Horizon back in 2003, and one of the first things that we've seen, not the first thing at all, of course, but one of the more recent things we've seen is the plan to sort of take fuel cells into trucking in New Zealand. Is that the right kind of place to essentially geofence an autonomous truck network?
Autonomous truck network. You didn't take very long to get to that question, did you? We'll
No,
talk a
sir.
little bit about autonomy in a moment, but first of all, let's take a step back to that first part of the question around the kind of global nature of this business, if you like. Um, Firstly, it's a global need. So what we're responding to is this increasingly urgent mandate that major corporations and governments have around the world to decarbonize activities, frankly. So even though we are, as you rightly pointed out, a young company within Hyzon, we have this deep experience in hydrogen, and we also have a strong global network. So we were able to leverage our networks and our experience to set out a path and start executing around some commercial activities for Hyzon Motors right from the outset. So if you like, we started a global business from day one. So consequently, we have customers in Australia, in New Zealand, as you rightly said, also in Scotland and in Germany and in the Netherlands. In fact, this reality of having emanated from Asia, it's a reflection on the rate at which hydrogen has been adopted around the world. There was really a first wave of hydrogen adoption and investment around hydrogen that was China, Japan, and Korea. Now, Japan and Korea were a bit more focused on the passenger car applications, but China in the last 5 years or so has been squarely focused on heavier vehicles in urban settings, which contributes substantially to pollution problems. So we were able, through the parent company, to gain a lot of experience in truck and bus applications, especially trucks. So Horizon has worked mostly on fuel cell powertrains for trucks in the last 3 or 4 years. So when we looked at the opportunity to globalize that, that's really what we sought to do by going downstream and creating Hyzon Motors. Sorry, Al.
No, no, that's okay. And I actually misspoke, to be honest with you. I wasn't trying to trick you on autonomous. I just misspoke. I meant to say fuel cell geofencing because really, when you think about it, and what we hear so much of in terms of trucking and things like that is sort of repeatable routes and things that happen again and again. Maybe they're dedicated routes, and a lot of that has to do with fueling. Quite honestly, you have an interesting approach to fueling, though, and I think you need to explain it, which is basically that's the customer's issue.
Not quite. We're here to help. We're here to help our customers make this transition. Firstly, I'll just touch on the autonomy for a second before we push it to the side. We did recently make an announcement about a collaboration with a company out of the UK called AI Drivers, and they're a company that's got quite a few activities in port operations around the world with fully autonomous vehicles. However, they were fully autonomous ICE vehicles. Now, what we're doing with them is preparing to deploy in the next 12 months or so the world's first fully autonomous, fully zero emission vehicles in ports. So that's actually a pretty exciting development. But full autonomy, as you know, is a challenge on public roads, but it's much easier in a closed environment like a port. And there are a lot of vehicles moving in ports. So we're excited to have our first fully autonomous fuel cell trucks here in the next, I'd say 12 to 15 months, certainly.
Yeah, that
So
that that
that's
would be
one
good. I
thing.
mean, we've
Yep.
seen we've seen some of the autonomous activity from Volvo with the I want to call it Lara, but it's not Lara. It's a different name. It's another woman's name. But basically, they have sort of the driverless version, and it's sort of a tow vehicle, I guess, of sorts. But it's
Yep.
it's driven that way. I want to stay though with fuel cells with you because that's obviously where
Yeah.
your
Can
business
we
is
go back
headed.
to the fueling question?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
So, in fact, what you've just inferred in terms of us, leaving the hydrogen to the customers, this is actually how we're starting the process of deploying vehicles. So we call these early seed sales, or these early validation sales. That's what we call them. So when you sell a few vehicles for the customer to kind of try the technology and make sure that they accept the way that the vehicles operate and the way that they interact with the vehicles and all the rest of it, and the performance is as promised. So these validation sales, actually in most parts of the world, they're happening in a scenario where the customer's already addressed the hydrogen availability issue, or the hydrogen is already available to the customers. So for a lot of these early sales in the next 12 to 18 months, especially, those deliveries are being made to customers that have kind of taken care of the hydrogen supply side. We do believe in the coming few years, as you go from those small volume validation sales and you start look at kind of scaling into fleet operation to really validate the technology as as a meaningful part of your fleet, you really start to get to a situation um, where Hyzon Motors will be more active in helping the customer solve the hydrogen supply challenge, because you need to start accessing significant quantities of hydrogen, and you'll start um, establishing substantial demand centers around fleet operations. So with substantial demand on hydrogen in a given location, this encourages and justifies investment in hydrogen production and availability in that location. So we're actually working with quite a few partners on the production and supply of hydrogen for the fleet operators to support the scaling up that will occur after the validation phase.
Right. Well, in your New Zealand announcement, you mentioned that is it Haringa? Is that how you say it? The
Hiringa, yeah, that's
your
the partner
partner.
in New Zealand. Yep,
Yeah, that they're actually going to develop the hydrogen network, fueling network, and I
that's right.
that's kind of where I got my question from. We had
Yeah, so that is a very close partnership, though. It's not as if they said we just need some trucks. We've taken care of the hydrogen. I mean, it's a weekly interaction with those guys for a long time. So it's a pretty close partnership, and there'll be more information coming about exactly how we partner to enable the match of hydrogen demand and hydrogen supply together with Hiringa. Yep.
New Zealand is a place, it seems, I've never been, but it seems to be the kind of place where you could do something like this with, I mean, they're islands, right? And so
Hmm.
you're going to reach the end of them at some point. And, it's not like the US, which you're obviously now getting used to, where the roads go on forever and ever. Um, is it a really ideal place to try this approach?
It's actually an ideal place to scale it substantially. You can try it anywhere, but if you think about an ideal place to actually substantially replace the combustion engine, heavy vehicles, it's a very attractive place to do that. And I think even in our announcement, we alluded to the fact that we can cover a lot of New Zealand in terms of reach for the vehicles with infrastructure that is going to be built here in the next 2 years. We're not talking about infrastructure that takes 10 years to build out. And that is, as you say, a function of the nature of the place itself. So, in fact, the North Island, we can cover all commercial vehicle movement in the North Island, even within the next 12 to 15 months, just with availability that will already be there. And then by the end of 2022, essentially all movements on the South Island too. The South Island is less populated and has some more kind of stretched out locations, take a little longer to get to that point. But on the North Island of New Zealand, you'll be able to pick any commercial truck route and it will be catered to with a fuel cell vehicle and a hydrogen station without question within 12 to 15 months.
So have you essentially solved the chicken and the egg question as far as, fuel cell trucks need hydrogen, but no, we don't have hydrogen. So what could we possibly do with fuel cell trucks? Have you beat that question?
We address that question in two different ways, Alan. The first is finding the partners like Hiringa in a scenario like New Zealand where it really stacks up to immediately go after a viable network. What we always spoke to with Hiringa about is the minimum viable network, right? So the minimum viable network there provides really quite adequate coverage for the North Island as a starting point. But the second way we address it is we focus on heavily on back to base fleet operations in the near term. The back to base fleet operations mean that you only need one point of hydrogen availability for 100 trucks or 200 buses or something like that, right? So that's a model that really works. There are a lot of commercial vehicles that operate on a back to base. It's usually the figures bandied around that there's usually more than 30% of all heavy vehicles actually function on that kind of a mode. And then there are a lot of other vehicles that are functioning on pretty predictable point-to-point type logistics and interacting with intermodal facilities and all that sort of thing. So a very substantial portion of trucks are serviceable without having a national network of hydrogen, but rather having hydrogen close to the point of that, close to the base of that hub of activity or that kind of star, if you like. They emanate out from a point and come back. So you can have hydrogen in a central location and do a lot of good work. And then of course, when you have a viable hub of activity like that, and it's located within 200 or 300 miles of another viable hub, well, of course, you've got point-to-point fueling already, right? And with a handful of viable point-to-point fueling scenarios, you're already building a network. The network will occur all on its own.
Right. The idea of back to base is interesting because recently one of the competitors in the U.S. put together, I think, four partners and said, they were going to use a mobile hydrogen refueling. It was not going to be green hydrogen. It was probably gray at best. And the idea was they would sort of truck hydrogen to the needed place. Um, do you see any place along the supply chain for hydrogen where something like that makes sense?
Look, our view is that hydrogen is kind of the ultimate localizing force. It's really very difficult to move economically. Moving liquid fossil fuels is fairly efficient from a cost structure standpoint. Hydrogen is not like that at all. So a tanker that might carry, you know, 25,000 liters or 6,000 gallons of a fossil fuel, liquid fossil fuel, a diesel or a gasoline. The same tanker can only cart 500 kilograms. of hydrogen, 1,000 pounds. So it's just not the same kind of bang for your buck in terms of logistics costs for the fuel value. Now, hydrogen's more efficient in the vehicle than diesel by a kilogram or liter or pound or gallon, whatever, but still, that's such a huge differential in the energy density of the fuel being moved that it makes the cost structures really challenging.
Mhm,
So, in our view, it makes sense to make hydrogen as close to the point of consumption as humanly possible.
mhm, mhm. You have a partnership strategy that I'd like you to talk about. That is partners pretty much on everything except maybe the core fuel cell work, the stack work, and that sort of thing. Uh, this seems to be the way you're going to market, both in terms of, truck builds and things like that. Can you talk about partnership model?
Yeah, that's really important, Alan. So, Um, I'm not sure that our growing team of engineers would think we don't do anything besides build fuel cells. There's there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into engineering the complete vehicle solution, but I'll describe it for you. So you're right that the heart of a commercial vehicle is the engine, and naturally in a fuel cell electric truck or a fuel cell electric bus. Um, the that heart, that engine, is a fuel cell. So clearly, the very important component, or the most important component in a commercial vehicle powered by hydrogen, is the fuel cell itself, and that is indeed our core technology focus. However, it's also very important how the power gets from that fuel cell. So the power is generated in the fuel cell through the conversion of the hydrogen. It's obviously a static conversion. There's no burning involved. How that power gets to the wheels, if you like, that's also incredibly important. So just as nearly as important as the work that goes on to develop and build our fuel cell systems is the work that goes on to design and manage that entire process of assembly and all the rest of it for the holistic vehicle systems. And this includes all of the controls, our ability to access the data remotely in terms of the operation of the vehicle, the efficiency with which the electric motors and the regen braking all work, etc. So there's a lot of vehicle level control and integration and design that occurs. And then we do, as you say correctly, we do partner on the manufacturing of the vehicle platforms, such as the chassis, the cab chassis setups. We like to buy glider kits and fit them out with our fuel cell system and our drive system. And we believe that that's an efficient way to get vehicles to the market, and we can use existing capacity in production of cabs and chassis and the production of electric motors with vendor partners and the production capacity that's being built in hydrogen storage and all that sort of thing. So we tap into those kind of vendors, but we very much focus on the fuel cell system and how the fuel cell system gets its power to the wheels, if you like, and the efficiency and the nature of that entire operation, and the reason why we feel comfortable and confident in putting a partnership model around this is because really it's the core fuel cell and the design of the entire vehicle running on the electric system that determines the performance of the vehicle, the fuel efficiency of the vehicle, and the durability, and therefore how many miles you can get out of it, how many miles you're going to get from that vehicle. And those are the fundamentally most important things in a trucking application. How reliable is it? How powerful is it? And how long is it going to last? And how efficient is it in terms of converting the fuel into, dollar ton mile kind of equations?
Right, right. I want to get you out of here on this one. You announced very recently that you're already expanding in upstate New York and Rochester, Honeywell Falls. Have to mention for the audience that it's not ironic, but it's actually quite uh, helpful that you took over the former General Motors fuel cell headquarters in Honeywell Falls and purchased that
Yeah, we
last
took over
July.
some labs. We didn't really take over the whole buildings or
No,
anything, but yeah, we took over the labs from the former General Motors research facility.
right.
That's right. Yep.
Right, right.
Yep.
But now you're already talking expansion, perhaps 100 new jobs and 7,000 to 8,000 square feet, right there in the Honeywell
Yep.
Falls area. Um,
Yes.
that speaks to confidence. Just finish us up on that, will you?
Sure. So yeah, we're fortunate that we were able to move in and refurbish and equip the former General Motors fuel cell labs in the Honeymoon Falls area because there's a lot of infrastructure in these labs, right? And so we were able to refurbish and recertify these labs with all the hydrogen equipment and so on. And we're doing testing and engineering in those labs now. But we also needed a very sizable production area because we don't only have to build fuel cells, we need to do prototyping of trucks and so on. Because even though we have a partnership model on manufacturing at scale, we still need to develop the vehicle level systems. We still need to build the vehicle prototypes, the working prototypes that go through a lot of validation and testing and so on, before we're able to outsource an assembly process to a partner like Fontaine Modification, which is our assembly partner here in the US. That's
Sure.
a group owned by Berkshire Hathaway. They've got lots of plants scattered around the country. Your listeners probably know them well enough. But before we issue work instructions and assembly, kits, we have to get it right, and we're doing that kind of prototyping here in the Rochester area as well. So in
Sure.
fact, the new facility, which we're just refurbishing now, is going to be set up not only for fuel cell production and fuel cell system production, which kind of turns the core fuel cell module into more of like a recognizable engine replacement, but also hydrogen systems, doing this small scale truck integration and testing, that's happening here as well. So definitely we needed a pretty good sized space, and we found a terrific building which we were able to secure late last year, and just as I said, just refurbishing now and getting ready to be working in that building here in the second quarter.
Mhm. Well, I'm going to close this out with something that comes up a lot when we talk about electrification, fuel cells, and things like that, and that is that um, your timing seems extraordinary. You came here purchased the labs back in July of last year, but now the very quick way that you managed to put together funding through the SPAC, that's such a big area, electrification for the blank check companies or the shell companies, if you will. Very quickly, tell us how that came together, and did you have a lot of suitors, or did you talk to a lot of folks? What happened there?
Sure. So as you know, even from our earlier conversation, Alan, we were considering how best to bring the kind of capital into the company that we needed so that we've got a strong balance sheet to go and execute to plan because we really needed to build facilities, hire the experienced automotive teams, and that's what we've been setting out to do here in the last 6 to 9 months, obviously. Uh, but when we considered the routes to raise capital, obviously private investment or traditional IPOs or SPACs, you have to kind of consider the pros and cons of all. And obviously, we spoke with bankers and investors and advisors on all different fronts. We did speak to a number of potential SPAC partners. Um, we didn't find a large number of really suitable candidates. We really needed the right fit for us. Now, in finding the decarbonisation plus SPAC, we felt a very strong fit right from the outset, and basically, almost from the first meeting, it was almost a mutual commitment to really dig into this and see if it made sense because it felt like such a positive fit from the beginning, and actually the process has been pretty enjoyable. I mean, pretty taxing as well, uh, just tiring, but working with that group, which is highly professional and organized and very focused on a mandate where they identified an operating business that had a core technology that really could cause a disruption or an acceleration around these energy transition kind of activities. It's really just been, for us, ideal. So
Right.
we could have done it a different way, yes. Are we happy with the way it's come together? I would say also yes.
Yeah. Well, listen, Craig, thank you so much for your time, for sharing so many specifics with us, and just helping us understand how really the democratization of fuel cells, which we probably never really fully defined, that has actually come together for Hyzon Motors. Best wishes to you as you move ahead.
Thank you very much, Alan.